For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, here we go. Episode number 60 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying it, make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening. That'll get you the latest episodes automatically to your phone. Also, check out buffaloroamer.com. Got all kinds of cool stuff. Of course, you can listen to every podcast episode there. Also got 2023 canoe trip dates coming up. Buffalo Roamer Wilderness Trips. Those are going to be listed on there awfully soon if they're not on there already when you're listening. So go check that out if you want to come join us on a canoe trip. Also, big shout out to happy 40th birthday to Nick Gebert. Nick, thanks for listening, man. Glad to hear that you're enjoying the podcast and listening. Tiffany emailed me and said that your 40th birthday was coming up, so figured I'd give you a little shout out here in the intro. So, Nick, happy birthday, man. Hope you find some time to get outside with the family, and who knows, maybe sometime we can get outside and join on a trip on the river sometime. So, happy birthday, Nick. Okay, episode 60. Katie Burgert is on the podcast today. Katie is the host of the Fish Untamed Podcast. Really enjoyed talking with Katie. We talked fishing, adventuring, camping, backcountry, kind of her story, and yeah, a lot more. So really enjoyed talking with her. I also did an episode on her podcast where we flipped the script and I was the guest on her podcast. So you can go check that out. That should be out now. If it's not while you're listening, it will be out soon. Again, her podcast, Fish Untamed. And I think I'll also post that episode on Buffalo Roamer Outdoors at some point here in the future. So without further ado, episode number 60, Katie Burgert. Katie, I'm happy to talk with you. In a long time no see. We talked yesterday for your podcast, which is Fish Untamed. That was a fun conversation. So glad to flip the script here and be able to ask you some questions. So that was fun yesterday.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on the other side of the mic too. I feel like going from host to guest is like I can just sit back and relax and see what comes instead of feeling like I need to control everything. Yeah,
absolutely. Like we were saying on yours, or I was saying on yours, I asked if you could go first because I was kind of in a rush beforehand. Usually if I'm, like tonight when I'm interviewing you, I'll sketch out some notes, a couple thoughts, kind of get in the frame of mind before talking to you. Nothing crazy, but a few minutes. And then, but yeah, when I was asking if you could go first, I was like, you go first, because then I just show up, turn on the microphone and shoot from the hip,
Yep. But It's a different kind of stress as the guest because I'm like, I don't know where we're going to go. When you're the host, you kind of have a feeling for, where you're going to take it. And I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm excited.
Totally. Me too. Well, let's talk fishing. That's what I'm thinking we'll do is talk fishing. You run the podcast Fish Untamed. So tell me, I guess, how you got into, we'll start with the podcast world, how you got into to doing Fish Untamed.
Yeah, it's kind of a long roundabout story, but I've been fishing since I was a kid. Had a spin rod growing up and did a lot of bass and pike fishing. And through a kind of a strange series of events, I ended up out here in Colorado. I was born in Pennsylvania, so I ended up in Colorado my freshman year of college to guide fly fishing, and I had never fly fished before. So I came out to work in the fly shop and kind of learn the ropes out here, kind of tag along on trips. And eventually worked my way up to being able to take trips up by myself and stuff like that. But once I graduated college, I moved out here permanently and needed a job for the rest of the year because that was just a summer gig. So I went from fishing being a huge part of my life and what I was spending every day over the summer doing to entering the quote unquote real world, working a 9 to 5, not getting as much time out on the water. And so I wanted a way to kind of scratch my itch and feel like I was still connected to fishing even when I couldn't get out as much. So I started Fish Untamed as a blog where I just write write articles about all kinds of stuff, stories and tips and things that I'd experienced. And eventually that just became a little bit tedious. I'm not huge into writing. Like I kind of wanted to be, and then it wasn't exciting to me. I felt like it was a burden. But meanwhile, I'd go to work and I'd listen to podcasts for like 8 hours a day while I worked. So I was deep into the podcasting. I feel like I listened to all the podcasts out there about fishing. And I was like, you know what, this seems like something I could stick with a little bit more. And so for a while I did the blog and started the podcast. And eventually I was having so much fun doing the podcast and the blog. So I just kind of tossed that aside and stuck with the podcast. And that's where we are today. Now I actually do have a chance to go fishing more, but I'm having fun meeting people and talking about fishing. So that I intend to continue that for a while.
That's great. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool the people you meet and the connections that you meet from doing the podcast. This is episode, I don't know, somewhere in the 60s this will be. And I see you have a bunch too. What are you on, 80 or something?
I think you were 93,
okay.
If I remember correctly.
Perfect. There you go. So yeah, it's fun being able to make those connections. I'm sure you've made some connections, and I'm sure you've met people in person that you only talk to from the podcast. I'd have to assume, right?
Yeah, I have. And actually, I've talked about that with a couple people. People ask, do you make money on the podcast? And I make enough to like break even basically, which is fine by me. But I've made connections that I view as, more valuable than, putting $20 in my pocket, which is, for a niche podcast, you're not going to make it big. You're not going to be the next, like This American Life, talking about a niche subject within a niche subject. But yeah, I've actually last January, I ended up going to Minnesota to go dark house spearing for the first time with Mark Norquist, who I met through the podcast. So yeah, I've like traveled across the country to meet up with people that I've talked to. Just started from an email and saying, hey, you don't know me, but I'd like to talk to you. And I'm sure more of those are going to happen in the future too. But it is really nice to make those connections and people you can reach out to and say, hey, and you feel like you're friends even if you haven't met.
Totally, absolutely, and they get to know you because they've listened to you so much. I'm sure they know you probably more than you know them. But the dark house spearing sounds awesome. What was that trip? Give me a little rundown of that. That sounds wild.
Sure. So I don't know how familiar you are with it at all, but I'll just kind of start from square one if anyone is completely unfamiliar. And I'm by no means an expert, so don't come to me for expert advice on it. But basically, it's kind of a niche culture, it seems, up in kind of the north Midwest, Wisconsin, I think Michigan and Minnesota. I went to Minnesota, and basically you cut a big hole in the ice. So think ice fishing, but instead of like a small round hole, it's kind of like a 2 foot by 3 foot chunk of ice that you saw out, and then you put a shelter over top of that, and the shelter is dark, like it doesn't let light in. So when you put that shelter over the hole and sit inside, the sun goes down through the ice around you and lights up the water underneath. So you're looking down into this 2 foot by 3 foot hole, and it's lit up like a television screen, so you can see down, see the bottom, see all the weeds and rocks and things, and then you'll see fish swim past. And you dangle a little fish decoy, like a wooden fish decoy, down the hole, and you kind of twitch it. It's on a little stick with a string, and you twitch it, and it draws fish in. Like pike will come in like a predatory way, and then the other species come in out of curiosity. And you've got what looks like a trident, like a pitchfork, a spear, and you throw it down at the fish as they swim below you, and you pull them up on the spear. And so it's kind of like a ice fishing, spear fishing combination. And I'm so upset that this doesn't exist in my area. Like, I don't think it's legal to have a hole that big in the ice in Colorado, because I looked into it when I got back, and you're not allowed to. But I really wish that this culture would spread, because it was like one of the most fun experiences I've ever had.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen, I don't know much about it, but I've seen a little bit just on social media and stuff. And yeah, it looks awesome. Looks wild. I have to imagine that's a different type of fishing than you normally do, huh? A little out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and like I'm not. We talked about this yesterday on my show. Like my show's very much fly fishing focused, and I'm very much fly fishing focused, just because being in Colorado with a lot of small trout streams, it just lends itself to fly fishing. That is the proper technique to do a lot of what I'm doing out here. I feel like I would be stretching it if I tried to use other techniques. And so I tend to do a lot of fly fishing. I'm by no means a purist. Like I said, I grew up with a spin rod, and when we go home, I still pick up a spin rod fairly often for like bass and stuff. So I just like fish and fishing. I'm just fascinated by both of those things and by the different subcultures around the country. I love seeing how, different little communities have like the ways they found to get fish out of the water. There's such a variety of ways that people do it that I'm just always interested in seeing how these different techniques have popped up and things that you wouldn't even know exist. Like I had no idea this was a thing until I started talking to Mark and he invited me up to do it. And it's such a big part of the culture there. Everybody's talking about, everybody's excited for the opening of the season. People carve the little decoys. It's like a whole art form. And I just love kind of immersing myself in those little subcultures that you'd never know about, but are like very rich and I don't know, have a lot of history behind them.
Totally. Yeah. It's so cool. I completely agree. And as I've grown as an angler, I have, grown in the different modes and methods too. And, when I first started fly fishing, I was, and got deep into the fly fishing, I was probably a little stubby nose about, dry flies or even, just fly fishing specifically, like poo-pooing spin anglers. And then I moved to South Dakota after being in Colorado for 5 years. Moved to South Dakota where, they don't have a fly rod within, 300 miles. And walleye fishing and pike fishing, and just absolutely loved it. And then there's just so many ways to fish. And like you said, too, all of the culture and nuances about those different, avenues of fishing, different ways of fishing are so awesome and so in depth, too. Kind of on the same note, I was on a fishing trip in Brazil about a year ago, a little over a year ago in November. And I was sitting around, and it was a fly fishing trip. We were fly fishing for peacock bass was the main target, but we were catching wolffish, catfish, piranha, all kinds of stuff. And it was myself and I think there was 7 other guys in camp, and they were all like 65 plus. The main guy, I want to say he was 82, but I could be mistaken. But regardless, great crew of guys, but they were all lifelong fly fishermen. And there was another guy. Our party was like 6. It was me and these older gentlemen, and then there was 2 other individuals who were just traveling on their own, kind of like I was. And they were spin fishing. All 6 of us were just fly fishing. And I sat down at the table, and we were like talking, and I found out that one of the guys was a big bass fisherman. So we were talking about different bass strategies, and talking about the Texas rig, the Alabama rig versus the the wacky rig or the Ned rig or drop shotting, or like all these little niche topics within spin fishing. And the fly anglers were like, what in the world are you guys talking about? They're like, you guys are talking like a whole different language. Like, I had no idea that spin fishing could be that in depth. And I was like, yeah, of course. And then meanwhile, talking to the fly guy, the spin guys have no idea, because I'm like, yeah, like throw a woolly bugger or, articulated streamer or, whatever it is. So it's cool to be able to go between the interdisciplines, I think.
Yeah, it's something I'm still like mostly a fly fisherman, but I have actually in the past year or so bought both a bait casting rod and a spin rod, just because there's some species out here that I'd like to fish for more that just don't lend themselves to fly fishing. I mean, it'd be really cool, but if you want to go catfishing, which I have a bit of a goal this year to do some catfishing and catch one, because I've never caught a catfish.
Nice.
And so I'm kind of thinking of this as more of a learning opportunity. Like, hey, let's dive into this other kind of niche area within fishing. Like you said, all the different rigs and stuff. I went out with a buddy, and we didn't get anything, but he showed me the ropes. We set up a couple different rods, a couple different ways, and I just like really enjoyed soaking in that information, because obviously even within whatever discipline you usually do, like for me, fly fishing, I'm still learning stuff all the time. But for the most part, I would consider myself, good enough at it that there's most things that I'm learning are more little tweaks, apart from like the big categories. Like I don't like Euro nymph, but within the like standard fly fishing that I do, most of the things I'm learning are small things. I'm not still figuring out like how to cast and stuff like that. And so it's fun to go to something else where you're a complete beginner, because I haven't experienced that in a long time with fly fishing. And I like that place where you are like, everything's new to you, everything's exciting, everything's interesting, and you don't realize like how deep some of these things go. I think I just like being like a student, and you have to kind of branch out if you want to be in that new beginner learning stage again.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I'm right there with you. I enjoy that aspect of fishing, and it's fun to be able to, sometimes you can pick up little things from spin fishing that you can bring back to fly fishing, or the other way around, like, I know the jig headed flies are really popular now. Like, those are basically came from spin fishing,
Mm-hmm.
So how?
Well, and there's a lot of crossover too between, fly fishing is different because you're using different techniques and stuff. But at the end of the day, the most important part to catching fish is understanding fish behavior and, reading water and stuff like that. And that is universal. I mean, if you know those things, you're already ahead of the game. For somebody who's a complete beginner, who's never looked at water, touched a fish, touched a rod of any kind. The hard part is knowing what it is you're trying to do. Like, what are the fish eating? How can I imitate that properly? And like those things, once you know those things, it's not that hard to pick up a different kind of rod and, try to imitate whatever it is you're trying to do. And I think people forget that there's a lot of crossover like that. And I don't know, a lot of value from learning different techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. The old saying, right? Like 10% or 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So how did you get, do you have like a story that you recall as a kid or whenever it was, like that when you realized like, oh man, like I'm hooked on fishing, like this is awesome?
I don't have like a single instance. So I have two half sisters, but they're much older than I am. So they were already moved out by the time I came along. So I grew up as an only child, and we had a cottage on a river in Western Pennsylvania. And so I would just kind of be dropped off and told to go entertain myself. And that's where fishing came along, because it was something I could do by myself. What I don't know is how I stuck with it, because I remember back in the day, like I would go out fishing and I would fish for like a week or two between fish. I'd catch like one fish and it was a highlight of my month.
Totally.
And I'd come back and like tell everyone about it. And then I'd go out and I'd do it again for the next month and not catch anything. And I don't know how I was like still interested in that as a kid, because I feel like with kids, you got to kind of keep it action packed or they lose interest. But something about it just kind of drew me in, and I would just stand out there with a rod casting over and over and over again to the same spot, hoping for a different result. So no, I don't like have a single moment. It just kind of happened and grew from there. And it's morphed over the years, but for the most part, the passion's been there since I was, 5 or 6, and hasn't really gone anywhere.
It's funny looking back on those times too, like when you were talking about that. Obviously I still get skunked way more than I like. Yeah. but like those early days learning fly fishing for me is when I was in college, like a freshman year in college, just trying to figure it all out. Like I remember the first time my buddy showed me just like a double nymph rig or like a dropper hopper rig or something like that. I was like, whoa, like that's a whole new level to this, and just learning those little intricacies along the way. And yeah, like you said, like having no success, but just enjoying being out there. And then you do have that little, that tiny little fish that you hook, and you're just like so pumped. It's fun going through that learning process.
Yeah, I remember like I would stand out on like a big rock and cast for a smallmouth bass, and I'd want to, but my dad would be on shore because he wasn't a big fisherman. He would take me out occasionally, but for the most part, he was just like, go have fun. But I was so excited about all the fish that I would bring them all back to him. Probably not great fish handling, because I would like walk them across this pretty big river just to bring them back and show them. They were bass, so hopefully they're okay. It wasn't like a fragile trout, but I would be so excited that I'd have to bring every single fish back to show them. And I don't know, some of those fish probably spent a long time out of the water getting carried back. But I mean, that's like the highlight of your life at that moment is, what you've been working toward. And it was so rare that it was just like, everyone has to see this.
It's so funny too, isn't it? How, Yeah, some folks, it's just in their blood. It's in my blood. I know it for sure. Like if I see water, I'm like, okay, where are the fish at? Like, if I'm crossing a bridge on a bike ride or something, I always stop and look down in the water. Like fishing just runs in my blood, and it sounds like you as well. I mean, especially for not having like a parental figure or like a sibling who you'd like go out with. It was just like innately kind of you wanted to do it.
Yeah, I've heard that from quite a few people. The two stories I hear a lot are, either I discovered this later in life and it felt like I should have been doing it my whole life. It calms me and takes my mind off things, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And then the other story is, I don't know, it's just kind of always been there, and I like can't picture my life without it. But I don't know where it came from. It was just there, and that was me for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. So, how did you go? What was the leap of faith from going to the guide shop and like trying to soak in all you could in the fly fishing world? So you were in Pennsylvania and you were in college in Pennsylvania and you spent your summers out west, or how did that go?
Yeah, so my freshman year of college, so the guide shop I worked for was a seasonal thing. And it was not like a traditional fly shop. It's more catered toward like family trips. So you're not paying like $500 for a drift boat and exclusive access or anything like that. It was, hey, me and the family want to come out and learn how to fly fish. Can we book an affordable trip with you? So it was kind of more geared toward introducing people to it. We obviously took out experienced folks as well, but it was much more family friendly than a typical fly shop would be. And it's only open from like May to September.
Okay, cool.
And so a lot of the folks that work there are teachers, because they'll do this summer job and then go back to teach during the rest of the year. And my sister already lived out here, and she was a teacher, and she worked with one of the guys who guided for them. And he was like, hey, we're looking for help for the summer. Like, do you know anyone who likes to fish? And she's like, well, my sister likes to fish, but she doesn't fly fish. And he's like, well, give her my number and like we can maybe make something work. So I just got a call one day being like, hey, do you want to come work in Rocky Mountain National Park guiding fly fishing? And I was like, this seems suspicious.
Too good to be true.
But okay. So I came out here and showed up, and I would tag along on trips and kind of just like soak in what I could, learning to fish with the guests coming out. I was just there to watch. I would help tie knots and stuff like that. But technique wise, I was like learning along with everybody else, but I was kind of there as a pack mule and stuff like that. And then I'd work the shop and help people book trips and things like that. And then I worked there for maybe 3 or 4 years, and so by the end of it I was going on trips as a normal guide, and also working the shop. I liked working the shop. I know some people use working at a fly shop to like become a full-time guide, and I really liked the balance, because I would get kind of burnt out by the end of the summer going to the same spots over and over again. So I liked being able to mix it up between the shop and taking folks out. But yeah, that's basically how I got there.
Awesome. Yeah, Rocky Mountain National Park, how about that place, huh?
It was such an amazing like first dip into Colorado.
What? Well, yeah. Talk to me about Rocky Mountain National Park. I've done a few trips in there. I've caught in greenback. What is it? Greenback cutthroat. Is that the name of the species? Yep. That's like unique to that area, right?
So the greenback cutthroat story is kind of a convoluted one. I don't know how deep you want to go into it, and I don't know all the details, but the 30,000 foot view is that they thought they were thought to be extinct a long time ago, and then they found a population and stocked them all over the place, all over Rocky Mountain National Park. And the brochures you'd get in the park were they loved to promote this,
right?
State fish, endangered, thought to be extinct. Yeah, and then it came out maybe 10 to 15 years ago, I'm not sure on the date, that actually all of those fish were not what they thought they were.
Really?
And that they were, I don't know if they had maybe a little bit of greenback DNA in them, but they were not like the pure greenbacks that they thought they were. And I don't know what strain it mostly was, maybe Colorado River cutthroat. I'm not positive on that.
Sure.
And so then I think there was another kind of panic of like, oh no, this wasn't them, are they still around? And they did find a pure strain in one of the creeks. So now they're doing kind of like a secondary stocking where they have now another list of locations that do have pure greenbacks that have been like genetically tested and confirmed to be the pure strain. But it's not all those ones that are across Rocky Mountain National Park. There's like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 locations that they put them in. I could be
Okay.
wrong on that too.
Huh.
And I'm not sure if Rocky Mountain's still like really advertising their like come here and catch the greenbacks.
Sure.
Like I don't really care if they do. I mean, people get excited about it, and you couldn't tell the difference visually. They look the same.
Sure.
But I do wonder how many people I told, because back when I was guiding, that we thought they were greenbacks too, and so I don't know how many people I told like, oh yeah, you caught this unique fish that only exists here and it's our state fish and blah blah blah. But I think that's not the case.
Breaking my busting my bubble. I'm gonna have to take it off my species list now.
Well, you have to just come and I can help you get some. They're not terribly hard to find.
Yeah, awesome. It's wild how like these streams that we're talking about in Rocky Mountain National Park, which if you've never been, is just like the most pristine, amazing, spectacular, like jagged peaks, really awesome park, elk everywhere. But these, like, the water is so small. It's like these creeks are pretty tiny. The fish are not very big, pretty tiny, but it's just wild that they have this specific, or at least they thought they did, specific strain of fish that is found nowhere else other than in these tiny little creeks and stream beds. Have you done much backpacking and kind of backcountry fishing through Rocky Mountain National Park? I know that's a kind of a passion of yours is the backcountry fly fishing.
Yeah, I used to do a lot more when I lived up in Estes. That was kind of like the only place I went. But now living a couple hours south of there, I don't actually get up to Rocky very often. Also, the crowds have just gotten crazy. I think it's one of the most visited parks in the country. So there's like, big lines, reservation systems, stuff like that. So I've kind of moved away from the park itself. It is an incredible place. Like I have no regrets spending as much time there as I did when I was up there. But now I've kind of moved into some of the more, I don't want to say remote, because there's a lot of remote places in the park, but less visited areas, less like lower traffic, I guess. But yeah, I do a ton of backpacking, just hiking, camping, and I usually try to incorporate fishing into that in some.
Love it. What is it that draws you to the backcountry fishing as opposed to just going out for an afternoon or whatever?
I guess mostly I just like being away from people, and I like beautiful scenery. Like I love fishing, but I don't care that much about like size or anything like that. I mean, I like catching big fish as much as the next person, but I'm definitely not like a size driven person. I'm not like on a lifelong goal to catch a certain size of trout. I like spending time with my friends. I like being in beautiful environments, and I like not seeing people all day. And so that lends itself to like gathering a couple people up, hiking, 5 to 10 miles in, setting up camp, and then just like hanging out by a lake or a stream for a couple days. There's just something so peaceful about it, but also adventurous. Like I like working hard to get somewhere, but then also having this like calmness come over you. Especially we've talked about this on my show before, but when you're in the backcountry for 2-3+ days, like once you've been out there for a couple of days and you haven't had cell phone service, you haven't dealt with emails coming in and stuff, something like changes where you just kind of start to flow with the day. You wake up when the sun comes up, you go to bed when the sun goes down. Your only chores or priorities out there are just like whatever you need to do at that moment. Like, hey, I need water. Hey, I need to get under my shelter because weather's coming. Like, there's not a list of things you need to be doing. You're just kind of existing out there and kind of becoming part of the daily cycle. And I love being out there long enough to hit that point because it's just such a nice reset. And I actually think, I don't know who did it, but there was somebody who was looking into this from like a scientific perspective of what changes when you're immersed in nature for I think it was 3 days was the point where something starts to maybe shift in your brain. And I think there was even some recommendations about how many times you should do this throughout the year to reap actual benefits from it. Like, go to your local park at least twice a week, be outside overnight at least a couple times a year and do like an extended at least 3 to 4 day trip completely disconnected once a year. And I think they showed that there were actual significant health benefits from doing these things just by giving your brain like a reset from the day-to-day just like noise that we all deal with.
I totally believe it 100%. Anecdotally, I have felt it I don't know, hundreds, probably close to hundreds of times, definitely hundreds of days over the collection of trips. And with the folks that I've taken out on as a guided trips, with friends that I've taken out, it's wild how that works, isn't it? It's like the first day you're out there, you're still worrying about work and like what was going on in the back of your head and blah blah blah. But yeah, as soon as that, I think it is that third day. As soon as that third day rolls around, everything just kind of melts, and like, exactly like you said, you're just like in the motion of the woods, like waking up when the sun comes up, eating when you're hungry, sleeping when you're tired, like, and I love when you finally get into the groove of that routine. It's like where it just feels normal to be like, all right, where should we stop for lunch? Like, oh, there's a flat rock there that'd make a good little perch spot, or whatever it might be, a good spot to throw the backpack off, or like there's a sandbar over there for the canoes, like let's hop out, and it's just like second nature. And when you unload the boats, for me, or like unloading the backpacks, whatever it is, like unloading the boats at the end of the day, everybody knows what they're supposed to grab, like the tent goes up first, blah blah blah, then we get firewood. It's just that flow, and once you hit that routine, oh, it's the best, isn't it?
And everything's so simple. Like, exactly what needs to get done. I mean, not that a lot of chores you do at home aren't simple, but there's always kind of that nagging thing in the back of your mind, like, what do I need to do? Who do I need to message? Like, what email do I need to respond to? And out there, it's very much like you just look around and you can see what needs to be done. Like you said, we got to pitch this tent. We got to get firewood. I got to eat some food because I'm hungry. And it's all very much like bodily cues and, things right in front of you that just need to get done. And it's just a very like simple, like I think this is why people are probably drawn to moving out into the middle of nowhere and getting a cabin and just living out there. Because it's like the rest of the world kind of ceases to exist, and it's just what is right in front of you and what you need to do. And it's very clear.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And the other funny part about that is that as soon as you are back into the front country, back into the world, it's just like you get that first text message,
Yeah.
that first email, ding, 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 ding. And then it's just like right away, you're like back into it like it never happened. Like every time I'm out on a trip, especially a longer trip, it's like at this point I've done it enough that I realize, I'm not going to feel like this forever. But still, it's like, it's so hard to fathom that this feeling that I'm not going to feel like this, like in 2 days, it's like, it's just, it's so strange. As soon as you're back in, it's just boom.
Well, and I swear I always get some sort of like bombshell email while I'm gone. Like I never come back and get, a couple of spam emails and some newsletters and things. It's always like, hey, we need this thing done earlier than expected or something. It's something that is so jarring. Like I always get one of those while I'm gone. And yeah, like really kind of, yeah, like I said, it's just jarring when you get back and you're just suddenly thrust back into it, and you really have to shift your mindset back into like being a productive member of society. And there's something that was just on the tip of my tongue. Oh yeah, I often go into like a bit of a depression when I get back for a couple days. Like I want to feel like I'm still reaping the benefits of going out, because in some ways I'm still on a bit of a high, like thinking back on, all the fun we had or whatever. But there's also a depression, like why can't I just do that forever? And here I am stuck, back in my office or whatever. That for a couple days I usually feel a little bit depressed, and I find myself like on Google, like reading about, the area we were in, or reading about fish, or just like something to try to keep myself in that mindset of like something related to what I was doing before, just to keep my brain slightly still engaged with that.
I know exactly what you mean. Usually I'm trying to plan the next one.
Yeah. Looking at maps or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any trips, fishing trips, or just travel trips or backcountry trips that come to your mind as being like one of the trips that was, I don't know if monumental is too big of a word for you, but one that kind of sticks with you?
Yeah. One I've talked about a decent bit, and I can't share too much because just by the nature of what the trip was. But my friend Allie and I, a couple of years ago, went up and fished for one of the only populations of golden trout in Colorado, and I think there's more now. They're kind of putting them in different places, so they're not like impossible to find anymore. But for a while they were pretty rare, and we ended up scouring maps and reading blogs and looking at pictures and stuff, and found where one of these kind of remote populations was. And we kind of just dove in, like we didn't really know what we were getting into, and it ended up being like a really, really grueling hike. I think it was maybe 11 or 12 12 miles in. And it was mostly off trail through like deadfall and stuff. So it's just, every step you take is just painful, but you have to keep moving because you're in the middle of deadfall, you're not near water or anything, you've just got to get to your destination. And we didn't even know if we were going to the right spot because this wasn't like a place that was listed on CPW's website. This was like we hope that this is the place people have been talking about.
We've heard through the grapevine.
Yeah and so we're like, hopefully this is the right spot. Hopefully they're still there because it's not a big area. It's not like a massive lake full of them. And who knows what we're going to find when we get there. So we got there and we ended up finding them, it was just like, I remember the moment that we realized we had found them and we were going to catch some, was just I can't even describe it. Just like such a wonderful, like warm feeling of like, I'm up here, I'm like with one of my best friends. We did it. It was like a physical accomplishment because we were just like dead tired. We got to camp up there for a couple of days and didn't see anybody. It was just kind of like the pinnacle of like what I want in a trip. Because I like trips to kind of suck. I enjoy like a nice,
you gotta earn it,
relaxation day. I like sitting in a hammock and enjoying the sunshine. But if it doesn't like hail on you or you don't fall and almost break a leg, like I don't know, I need a little bit of that in a trip to really, really feel like it was worth it. So I got a lot of that out of that trip.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I know exactly what you mean too on multiple fronts. A couple of things came to mind when you were telling the story. One, I've done 2 golden trout, both in Wyoming though, not in Colorado. One just over the border, and then just north, and then one in the Wind River Range. But then also in the Wind River Range, we were hiking one time on a backpacking trip in the Winds in Wyoming, and there was 4 of us, and we just picked like a lot of the stuff in the Winds is off trail. There's like trails to get into the main areas, but once you get into like the main basins, it's just kind of free roaming. There's not many trails. And so we just like picked a spot on the map and we're like, this lake looks awesome. We've heard, vague things about it. Not many people have talked about it. Probably good sign for us. So we're like, let's give it a shot. And just like looking at the topo on the map, it's like, okay, it looks doable. So we go in and like maybe a third of the way in on the first day, it starts dumping. And then we get into this forest and like you were saying, just deadfall everywhere. And just like the thickest deadfall. And we have these like overtly heavy packs on, like packing like idiots. I think we were like maybe 20, 22 or something, 21 at the time. And like trying to like shimmy over these downed logs while it's pouring. Like the logs are so wet and slippery. Like, I don't know how we didn't, roll an ankle or twist an ankle. And that is some tough hiking through that stuff.
It is so bad. And I don't know how it is in other states, but most of the forests we've been in Colorado have just been like decimated by the beetles. And some of that stuff is like nearly impenetrable. Like there's areas where it's not too bad. I don't know many areas where it doesn't exist at all, but there's a couple like nice places where you only have to step over 1 or 2 trees at a time. But a lot of the places I've ended up, I'm like climbing on all 4s over, 5 trees that have all landed on top of each other. And yeah, when you've got, a bunch of overnight gear on your back, once you start to fall, there's no stopping yourself. So you're just going to kind of go with it and have to tumble and hope that you don't hurt yourself too badly when you go down.
Yep. I know it all too well. The other thing that this conversation reminds me of is I still say to this day that like out of all the different styles of fishing that I've done, which is a lot, I've done a lot of different species, ocean fishing, saltwater fishing, fly fishing, musky, all kinds of stuff. But I still think one of my favorite ways to fish is hiking in or backpacking into a remote alpine lake, nobody around. There's just like a cirque of towers around you, and just like walking around that lake when you get there and first scouting it out from the height and just seeing like a trout come out from the depths to snag some grasshopper or beetle on the surface. You're like, oh yes, like game on. It's just such a great feeling. I think that's one of my favorite ways to fish.
Yeah, alpine lakes are definitely up there for me for the same reasons you described, and especially the terrain, because like streams are, they can be beautiful, but um lakes almost always are surrounded by big jagged peaks. Like you don't find a lake out in the middle of a field generally if it's an alpine lake.
Right.
You've got mountains all around, and because they take some effort to get to, you're not going to see a lot of people, and if you do, they're generally cool people. Like I'll talk to them because like, hey, you also trudged up here. We probably have something in common, versus seeing the crowds down off the roads. Um, I will say that they're kind of hit or miss though in terms of difficulty. I feel like I either show up at an alpine lake and there's fish rising everywhere, like you'll get a bite every cast without even trying. You put on any fly, and then other times I'll go up and I feel like I throw everything in my box with every technique, and I can watch fish just swim right past my fly without even looking. And it's just so frustrating. You could be up there all day and not even move a fish. So it's kind of hit or miss. I feel like usually I can figure it out enough to get a couple fish out of the water, but it's not the same as stream fishing where I feel like as long as you can find the pockets they're in and present something in like without too much drag, you'll probably get a couple fish. And I don't know what it is about those lakes that they're either really turned on or really turned off, and it can be really frustrating when they're turned off.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's the worst too. I can picture in my head multiple times. A couple of my buddies in particular, they've gotten better over the years. But when you're the fisherman right on the trip, and then you hike up to a lake, and like you say, and there's fish everywhere, and you're spending all this time doing it, and they're like, dude, there's a fish right there. Like, come on, cast over there. Like, hey, come over here. I just saw a fish. It's like, yeah, I saw him too. I'm trying to catch him. Okay, it's not working right now, guys.
Right.
They're like, dude, I just saw a fish. Come on, why don't you catch it?
Yeah, it's hard because you can see them a lot of the time. Like they'll just be cruising along, and if you can stand up on boulders and look down, and you might be able to see like a dozen fish, and they might look like they're feeding. They might be cruising around or something, but that doesn't mean they're going to eat what you have to offer.
Totally. Yep. How about species? It sounds like trout is obviously at the top of the list for you. Is that your favorite species to chase, or is there anything else on the list?
I feel like trout, various subspecies of trout or species of trout are top of my list only because it's what I've got access to and I love where they live. So it's not necessarily trout themselves that I love. It's just I like being where trout live, and it's what we've got a lot of in Colorado. So I end up fishing for them more than anything else. But like I said, growing up, I did a lot of smallie fishing, pike, walleye, in some of the warm water rivers back east. And I don't know. I kind of like all species. Like I like fishing. I don't care that much about species, but when it comes to trout, specifically, I do prefer like native species. I like targeting cutthroats. I also like brook trout because I think they're really pretty. I don't have anything against other species of trout, but I feel like I'm not as much on like the brown trout bandwagon as a lot of fly fishermen. I think a lot of people put them kind of at the top of the list because they get so large and aggressive. And I totally get that. Like I'll never turn down like a massive brown trout eating a streamer. But because I tend to focus more on the kind of the whole atmosphere when I go fishing, like I prefer to just be out in the middle of nowhere, small stream, mountain, alpine lakes, things like that. I don't encounter a lot of like large predatory brown trout because I'm not fishing in their environments for the most part. And because I prioritize that atmosphere over like big fish, they don't occupy as big a part of my life as I think a lot of fly fishermen. But nothing against them. It's just it's not my jam compared to something like a native cutthroat. I'd rather chase those all day.
I know what you mean, and yeah, it's funny. As a fisherman, I'm always debating that more as I've gotten older, and more especially as I hang out with like fishier people. I've gotten more away from this, but yeah, I always only used to want to go to like the most pristine places and like the most like picturesque where nobody else is. And I still love to do that, obviously, anytime that I can. But I have gotten more comfortable with like I don't know, maybe fishing around people is the right word, but just being like, okay, there's a dam here. Like, it's like not the most picturesque thing, but this is where the fish are. So let's go get them,
right.
And there's such a fine line with that.
Don't get me wrong. I like fishing, and that I'm not so snobby that I like can't have someone in my view when I fish. It's just like when I have control over the situation, I'm going to choose to go to these places a lot of the time. But I still fish plenty of like tailwaters with people, lined up above me and below me. I still do a decent amount of that too. And like warm waters back east, it's a lot of like floating. I know we talked about that a lot, like the canoeing when you were on my show. But I grew up with a kayak, so I was always like floating the rivers, and so you'd see like other people kayaking, canoeing, tubers, things like that. So I don't mean to make it sound like I am like too good to fish near people. It's just that when I have my choice, I usually try to kind of get away from the crowds.
Totally.
But at the end of the day, I'll take fish wherever I can find them.
No, me too. But I didn't mean to say you, but I used to be like that, where I'd be like, even if it was a good area to fish, if there was someone there, I'd be like, or someone in the area, I'd be like, like I'm not here for that. But now I've gotten more into fishing where the fish are, and sometimes people are where the fish are, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
But obviously, yeah, I'm trying to get away as much as I can. How about, do you have like, is there a dream trip? The fly fishing world in particular is like loaded with all these fishing destinations and like saltwater trips and like all of these wild different species that you see on social media. A lot of them are kind of far off and fanatical maybe, but curious if you had like a dream trip or anything that piques your interest.
Yeah, for me, the number one would be Kamchatka, the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. I'd love to go up there and chase like the native species they have, plus like the big rainbows up there. The steel. I don't know if you can fish for steelhead actually up there. I know they have them, but they might be protected. But yeah, I mean, I've seen videos up there, and it looks like big fish, but in the setting I want, which is exactly like what my dream is to be able to get out in the middle of nowhere, but also catch like trophy fish. And I'd like to do some saltwater. I've never gone saltwater fly fishing, and we're actually I'm getting married in June, so we're talking about doing a honeymoon trip where we can do a little bit of scuba diving and try out some saltwater fly fishing for, I don't know, maybe bonefish or something, just something kind of easy, maybe redfish. I'm not sure. So we'll see. That's on my list and seems a little bit more doable in the near future. Kamchatka is more of a lifetime goal.
Totally. Yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, bonefish and redfish, both good species for trying out the saltwater. Does your fiance fish?
He does. Yeah, he's kind of gotten into it through me. But I kind of drag him along on a lot of my trips, and he's not as into it as I am, but he's happy to go. Like
That's good.
He'll fish too, and you know he likes backpacking and hiking and stuff. So it's usually not hard to convince him to go fishing with me, but he doesn't really do much on his own.
Sure. Have you been to Alaska?
I haven't. It's on the list.
You got to get to Alaska if you want to do Kamchatka. You gotta get to Alaska, man. It is just like it is Colorado on steroids. It's just so big. The water, so much water. The fish are big. It's so wild. It's yeah. You gotta add Alaska to the list for sure.
The problem with Alaska is I can't decide like when I want to go and what I want to do there, because I want to fish Alaska. I also think it'd be fun to hunt in Alaska. And like I feel like any time of year I go there, like I could ski in Alaska. There's so many things to do that I would like to do that it's like I feel like I'd have to go for either multiple trips or just stay there for like 6 months just to experience it all.
Paralysis by analysis, right?
Right.
Yeah, it is wild. Alaska. I haven't been there in the winter yet. It's on my list for sure is to get there in the winter. But yeah, just the rawness and remoteness of it up there is amazing. I'd love to do a hunting trip up there too. What type of hunting are you into, or are you into hunting?
Yeah, we do both archery and rifle, and we hunt elk, deer, pronghorn, and small game for the most part. We're actually hoping to go on our first waterfowl trip this year, so we'll see how that goes. But that's been kind of like a big barrier to entry because we don't really know where to start. So we got a friend who's going to take us out, but yeah, mostly big game and small game. Not a lot of upland or anything, just because to do that in Colorado, I feel like it's beneficial to have some private land out east, like for pheasants and stuff. And we don't have that, so it's mostly like what we can do on public land in the mountains.
That's awesome. And is that something that you've always been into as well, kind of tied in with the fishing, or is that something that grew once you came to Colorado, or what's the hunting story?
So I picked that up in high school back in Pennsylvania through actually my ex-boyfriend's dad. Like his son wasn't super into hunting, but I was really interested, so I would go out with his dad.
That's awesome.
Just for like whitetails. So I did start hunting in Pennsylvania, but I do feel like moving out to Colorado, it was kind of like I had to restart because it's completely different. I mean, growing up, it's like sit on a bucket at the base of a tree and wait, and you're sitting in the snow and waiting for deer to walk past. And now it's a lot more active, like mountain hunting, walking around all day, glassing. It just it and the tag system is so different that I had to learn all the licensing requirements out here versus going down to the gas station and buying a hunting license where you can now hunt everything in Pennsylvania. So that was kind of it's like a rebirth moving out here. But I've been hunting out here now for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. And it's picked up in the past couple. Like the first couple seasons were pretty dry. I didn't get much. But now we've kind of gotten in the groove a little bit and are having more success. Although we just got back from a trip this past weekend. It was pretty hellish. We went out for snowshoe hares, and we went the same time last year, and there wasn't much snow on the ground, but they were white. So we had a heyday. They were everywhere. And this year we didn't think to check the snow depths, and we got up there and there was a foot of snow on the ground. And we were like, well, rats, they're white, and so is everything else. So we ended up hunting on skis, which is something we've been wanting to try out.
That sounds awesome.
But didn't end up having any success. Yeah, we just kind of skied around and looked for stuff, but didn't find anything.
What is that called? Decathlon?
Biathlon?
Biathlon, the Olympic sport where they shoot the guns.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to shoot our guns, so we carried them around for sure.
That's cool. I like that you're into the small game. What other small game do you like chasing?
Mostly, so we do squirrel, although I like squirrel more back east because they were bigger, like gray squirrels and stuff. Out here, we've got fox squirrels down in the river bottoms in the plains, but the mountains are mostly pine squirrels, which are just kind of small. We'll take them if we see them, but we don't tend to drive out there just to hunt pine squirrels. But we like snowshoe hares. We did our first marmot hunt this year, which was
nice.
Eye-opening and pretty fun.
Yeah, a lot of those around, right?
Not as many as you'd think. I kind of pictured going out and just being surrounded by. You realize that, you see them in Rocky Mountain National Park where they come right up to you because they're getting Cheetos all the time.
Right.
And when you go out in the middle of nowhere looking for them, you see a lot from far away, but you realize that you don't actually get close to them very often when you're out not in the national park. Yeah. So it was kind of surprisingly challenging. We saw and heard a lot, but it was hard to get within 50, 75 yards to hit them with a 22. So that was eye-opening, but really, really fun.
That's fun. And what's your favorite game out of all that you chase?
To eat?
Or to hunt.
Oh, to hunt. Man, I don't know if I could choose. We every year we really love pronghorn. But if I only hunted on the plains, I think I'd get kind of sick of it. Like it's good. It's a good once a year hunt. Elk is really frustrating, but the scenery is probably the best. And, you really get deep in the mountains. Honestly, I feel like small game. Like I love walking around the woods with people, being able to talk, not having to get up at 4 in the morning in the dark.
It's not as strict and stringent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I find small game the most fun, but obviously you don't get as much meat. So I would prioritize big game if I could only choose one because, we like having meat in the freezer. But just for the act of hunting, I think small game of various types is my favorite.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's something that I've always wanted to dive into, but never really have. I have so many big old, I don't know what kind of squirrels they are, big old corn-fed squirrels here on my on my farm. I see them outside of my window just sitting in the tree and, gnawing on corn from the cornfield next door. Pretty funny, but I got all kinds of stuff around here.
Wait, so do you do any hunting?
I don't know. Well, I do waterfowl. Yeah, so I was out goose hunting, goose and duck hunting. I was just out goose hunting last weekend. I'll probably go out again this weekend. And that's about it. When I was in South Dakota, I did a lot of pheasant hunting as well. But yeah, I'd like to get into two things. I'd like to get into deer hunting and, whitetail out here and, three things: whitetail, coyote hunting, and I'd like to get into fur trapping too. I think that's something that's always kind of piqued my interest. I have a cousin who does it around here and has traps all kind of wild species. And I live on a farm, so I know there's a little creek that runs through the farm, so I know there's all kinds of stuff around, and that's something that's always really piqued my interest too. So I think I want to get into that. I don't know if I want to say less barrier to entry, but the deer hunting here in Illinois, it's I don't know, it's you have to have it for a certain county, so you have to know what county you're hunting in. You have to know, like, the windows are pretty small. It's only like 2 weekends for shotgun season. No rifles here, so I'd like to do it, but haven't. But the trapping thing kind of interests me, to tell you the truth.
Wait, you don't have a rifle season for deer?
No, it's illegal. To hunt deer by rifle here in Illinois. You have to use a shotgun with a slug.
I had no idea. I knew that you could use that in a lot of places. I didn't know that there were. I kind of assumed there was a rifle season for deer in every state.
Yep. And by the way, yeah, there's a little pheasant there.
I can see it, yeah.
Funny pheasant mount. A buddy of mine who was a taxidermist in South Dakota when I was living there made that for me. I thought that was funny.
Is that like a pheasant shoulder mount?
Yeah, exactly. A pheasant shoulder mount.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, only one I've ever seen too. It was hilarious. He gave it to me. I had it in my office, and I worked in radio when I was in South Dakota. I had it in my radio office there, and then I brought it with me back. It's pretty funny. But pheasant hunting's a blast too, like you said, kind of like that similar small game atmosphere where it's the stakes are a little less. Like you're walking with your buddies, flushing birds up. I really enjoyed doing that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like small game hunting by myself too. I mean, I have done it by myself and I enjoy it, but I really like the social aspect, and I like not having to be silent. It's just more of like a fun group activity, and like you said, the stakes are lower. Like if you miss something, it's like, well, we'll see another one. That's okay. Whereas if you miss a deer, you're like heartbroken because you might have been waiting there for days for one to come past, and then you blow it. So yeah, I don't know if you can see behind me. I've got a grouse fan on the wall.
Oh
too.
yeah, I see that.
Not as close as your shoulder mount, but
yeah. I would have guessed that's a turkey, so that's a grouse.
Yeah, you probably can't tell scale. I've got a turkey fan out in the
a little bigger,
out in like our entry room, but it wouldn't fit on this wall.
That's awesome. So your parents or your folks were not hunters or anglers?
No, my dad did a little bit of fishing kind of before I got into it. Like he would go up for an annual trip with his brothers to Canada, and they would kind of camp out and fish. But I think fishing was more of a way to feed themselves while they were out there. It was more about camping and canoeing around the lakes, and they'd happen to fish while they're out. And he would take me, like we would go out boating together. He enjoyed like floating down the river, so he would float with me and I'd fish. But he wouldn't fish like while he was with me. He was just there to be in the boat. But no, he wasn't a hunter, and my mom didn't hunt or fish. So no, it was just something that I was interested in, I guess.
Yeah,
but
that's great.
I'm interested in the fur trapping that you mentioned, because that's something I would also be interested in picking up. But not living in the mountains, I'm pretty sure there's some laws around how often you have to check your traps, and so I don't think it's really feasible to like set traps in the mountains and live hours away from that and have to check them like every so often. So I'm kind of jealous about you being able to maybe pick that up on your own land, because I would be interested in that. I've been tanning the snowshoe hair pelts we get, and I hope to make some things out of them. I don't know, hats or something.
That's awesome.
I think it'd be really cool to get into that with like other types of fur.
Totally. That's the main reason. Well, not the main reason, but one of the big reasons I want to do it. Like, I think it'd be awesome to make some some mitten trims or trim for my work jackets on the hood or something. I think that'd be awesome. How's that process been going? Is that something that you've done before, or you're just trying to learn, or you've done it a bunch?
I would say a little bit of both. I'm trying to learn, but it worked the first time I did it. So,
nice.
It's working, but I'm sure there's like more things I can learn to make them better. Some turn out better than others. I can probably get much better at skinning them to get like a good quality pelt. I end up with a lot of kind of raggedy edge. I need to trim some off to make it a decent shape. So I'll definitely get better at that. And I appear to only be good at doing it with animals that are not fatty, because I followed a process I found online for the hares. I mean, I found someone who has like a rabbit farm and followed that process, and it worked great for the hares. But then I tried to do it on the marmots, and they were so fatty that it turned into like it was just disgusting. I don't know how else to describe it. Like
I'll take your word.
Everything was so greasy. So I can do it specifically on like non-fatty rabbit-like animals.
That's cool. That's funny.
But I hope to move up in the world at some point. Be able to do, other animals as well.
You're ahead of me. That sounds cool too, because those snowshoe hares, that white fur is so pretty.
It is. It's beautiful. I found a pattern online where you can make a hat that's one type of fur on the outside, one type of fur on the inside, and I think it'd be cool to get enough hares and squirrels to do like a hare on the outside, squirrel on the inside for a hat, but the squirrels are so small that it's going to take a lot of squirrels for me to get to that point. So I think I'm still a couple years out.
That'd be awesome. Are you familiar with the squirrel tail? I believe it's MEPS who does it. They have you're familiar with that, where you can send in your squirrel tails for lure makers?
I am vaguely familiar with it. I've never done it. But I know the spinners you're talking about, and I think I knew that you could send in your squirrels, but I guess it was a memory I forgot I had. I read about it somewhere, but I forgot about it until you mentioned it.
It might be one of those like legend things, but I think I looked it up at one time. And for those listening who doesn't make sense to you, MEPS spinners, it's a fishing lure. They put little rooster tails on all of their lures, and I believe they're made out of squirrel tail, or a lot of them are made out of squirrel tail fur. So they are big buyers of squirrel tails. So I forget what the deal is. I want to say it's probably something lame, like a discount on MEPS spinners, but I do know they buy them, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I think I read that in maybe like a Field and Stream magazine or something, and I don't know if it was. I mean, I don't know if it was a historical thing, if they still do it.
Right.
I may have read like an old copy too, but I do remember reading something about them making them out of squirrel tails.
Yeah. One story here, and then we'll kind of start to wind her down. But I think something you'll appreciate is when we talked about my trip on the Yukon River on your podcast when we talked yesterday. So 70 days across Alaska through the interior of Alaska, and we ended up in the Bering Sea. So where the Yukon River pours into the Bering Sea was our final day, 70 days after we started. And the river is... There's a little village that we were flying out of called Imanik, Alaska, and it's a little salmon canning village, actually. They have a salmon plant there where they commercially fish salmon. And anyway, the river is like 20 miles, maybe 15 miles past Imanik, where it actually dumps into the Bering Sea and touches salt water. So we came into Imanik, and we arranged with a guy who actually was the mayor of Imanik, funny enough, to pick us up by boat like the next afternoon out at the ocean, and then rather than paddle upstream against the current back to Imanik, he was gonna shuttle us in his boat back into town, and we gave him, I don't know what it was, $50 or $100 or something to shuttle us back. And great guy, had fun time with him out there, and we were like celebrating with him, and he was telling us a bunch of stories. And when we got back, he brought us to his house, and his house is like, shack is not the right word, because it was much nicer than a shack, but it's not the same thing you would think of at driving down the road in your Colorado neighborhood. And anyway, he welcomes us in, and he gives both my buddy and I a piece of tanned seal hide. And so it's like as a gift, he gave it to us. And so I have a piece of seal fur. It's like, I don't know, probably this big. It's a pretty big piece, and it's awesome, super smooth, and just looks really beautiful, intricate with like silver and like little black dots on it. And I was asking him, because he had all kinds of fur. One of the cool things that I found out, they would use fur for all kinds of stuff, trim. They use like caribou and wolf fur for like a sleeping pad. Rather than like a thermarest, they'd just lay down the fur and then use that to sleep on top of when they were camping. But anyway, the seal hide. So he gives it to me, and I look at it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And I'm looking at it, and I notice that there's two little holes in it. One of them is like a small kind of circular hole, and one of them is kind of at an angle. And I'm looking at it, and I asked him, I'm like, oh, what's going on here? Like, was this a mess up in the tanning process or something? And he's like, oh, no. He's like, that's where they shot him, and that's where they speared him. Just still two holes in the fur from the perfect circular one was from where they shot him, and then the one at the angle was where they speared it. Pretty wild.
So have you done anything or have plans to do anything with the seal hide, or is it just more of like a decorative, like a cool thing to have.
Yeah, it's a decorative piece. It's bad. It's been sadly it's been in my basement, but hopefully this conversation maybe it needs to be hanging in this office. I've always like kind of had in my head like you know how they tan the beaver hides with like the stretched out and just kind of looks like a like old historical way. I want to do something like that, but obviously that's not like fitting for seal. But I don't know. I want to either frame it or like do something, but I don't exactly know what. I want to hang it on the wall, basically, is what I want to do, but I don't know how to do it really. I've gone to some like custom framers, and the prices they've given me, it's like no way.
Dude, I don't know what it is about frames, but I feel like anytime we get any sort of piece of art, the frame is the limiting factor in terms of cost.
It's
like we can buy
ridiculous.
the prints, but man, frames cost so much money.
No, it's insane. Yeah, I was surprised too. I was like, this wouldn't be a big deal, and then I was like, oh, this was like a huge sale, and I was like, yeah, okay, I definitely am not doing that. I'll go another route. Yeah. Well, Katie, it's been a blast. It's been a blast chatting with you and swapping some stories and sharing some fishing lore. Anything else? Any final thoughts before we wind her down?
No, just thank you for having me on. Like we talked about at the beginning, I feel like I make such great connections just cold calling, or not cold calling, but cold reaching out to people, just saying like, hey, do you want? And it's crazy how people are willing to talk to you for an hour if you just ask, and that's all it takes to kind of feel like you get to know somebody. And I got to talk to you twice, which is great. Like I said, being on this side of the mic is kind of a fun experience for me. So I just thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out. It was great to connect. And remind me again and remind folks the best way to tune into your podcast and to kind of find you and subscribe to what you got going on.
Sure. So it's just called Fish Untamed. You can find it wherever podcasts are found. Website is fishuntamed.com. There's some like legacy blog posts on there, as well as all the podcast episodes you could listen to on there. There's also a contact form for anyone wants to reach out, or just fishuntamed@gmail.com if you don't feel like going through the contact form. And then I'm on Instagram @fishuntamed. It's really the only social media I use. And I mostly use it for podcast promotion. I occasionally post some personal stuff on there. If I take a trip or something, maybe I'll share a photo. But for the most part, it's just podcast promotion. But folks can also message me on there if that's preferable to email, since it's usually a little bit faster for me to get the messages there. But yeah, that's about it. That's really the only place I'm active. So yeah, either email on the website or on Instagram.
Okay, awesome. Fish Untamed. Katie, take it easy. Great chatting with you, and tight lines.
All right, you too. Well, thank you.
All right, there you have it. Episode number 60 with Katie Burgert of the Fish Untamed podcast is in the books. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening. Also, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps the podcast grow and reach new people, and only takes a few seconds. You can also leave a review. That really helps as well. Go check out buffaloroamer.com. All kinds of cool stuff out there. We got 2023 canoe trips coming up. Also, happy birthday, Nick Gebhardt. Thanks for tuning in, man. Thanks for being a listener, and happy birthday. Hope you enjoy it. All right, everybody, go get some fresh air. Go outside. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks.